Let me now very briefly introduce Professor Ronald Hendel. Professor Hendel is Emeritus Professor of Hebrew Bible and Jewish Studies at UC Berkeley Center for Jewish Studies. Professor Hendel approaches the Hebrew Bible from many angles: history of religions, textual criticism, linguistics, history of linguistics, comparative mythology, literature, and cultural memory. His books include the text of Genesis 1 through 11, the Anchor Bible, which those of you who've done any work at all in Bible will know is the gold standard. Remembering Abraham, Culture, History, and Memory in the Hebrew Bible. How Old is the Hebrew Bible? A linguistic, textual, and historical study. And I guess we ran out of room on the flyer because he's also the author of Genesis, a biography, which is actually one of my favorite of yours. And he is also the general editor of Reading Genesis 10 Methods or 10 Ways, I forget, 10 Methods.
10 ways.
A really wonderful collection of the best scholars. And although I did promise, I don't think I promised him I wouldn't say this, I'm going to anyway. This is Mr. Genesis. He is the world expert, and we're so glad that he has come here today. So, Ron.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to still be here after last night. I was looking for those twisters, but fortunately we didn't have them. But I did enjoy the lightning show. I did enjoy the light and sound show last night. Yeah, my topic here today is how to read Genesis, and I'm going to give the Tower of Babel as an example. Since, as Alan mentioned, I'm writing a multi-volume commentary on Genesis, and I've written a bunch of other books about Genesis. It's sort of like, cell phones. You get addicted to it, and so I keep writing things about it. So I've been sort of thinking about some of the big issues of how does one read Genesis? What kinds of issues are entailed? What kinds of, where are we in how are we situated vis-a-vis this book? And this is all just self-justification, of course, because why would someone still be having to write another commentary on Genesis when there's hundreds already? So yeah, so I'm justifying myself by asking these questions. So I want to first show that you can read Genesis in all sorts of forms, in all sorts of ways. The picture that I have up here is the first chapter of Genesis written on an egg, on a hard-boiled egg. So I'm not the only one obsessed with the book of Genesis. This is in a museum in Jerusalem. It's really just a chicken egg. It's just a hard-boiled egg. And someone wrote the whole first chapter of Genesis. So you can read it on an egg, you can read it on a screen, you can read it on parchment, you can read it in all sorts of different ways. And there have been many ways of reading Genesis. Okay, this is something I don't want to bore you too much, but there's a little bit of a theoretical framework that I've been thinking about, and this is nothing really new, but it's just trying to put some of the pieces together. There are different kinds of frameworks of reference that I think are activated when one reads the book of Genesis, or when one reads anything really. But some of these things are more salient or more obvious or more unknowable when you're reading an ancient book. So I just thought I'd make a little slide that has frameworks of reference that are activated when you read Genesis. First of all, at the top, and I don't want to say first or second, but the one that's on top is the frame of reference, the organizational structure within the text itself. Okay, so this is a kind of linguistic structure of the text. It's also the literary and artistic structure of the discourse, of how the stories are told, the literary styles of the different writers, the ways that plots are constructed, and the sorts of things that I'll be talking about in a few minutes in exploring the internal complexity of in our example, the Tower of Babel story. So there is an internal world of reference, an internal frame of reference within the text itself. You know, it consists of words, sentences, discourses. There's also an external world that the text, that the internal world of the text refers to. You know, things, objects, ideas, places. So there's always an interplay between the internal world of the text and the external to which the text refers. Okay, and as we'll see, the Tower of Babel itself is a reference to a big ziggurat in Babylon. And so these are things that, you know, existed in the contemporary world of the text that are part and parcel of the referential structure of that internal world that points outward to things in the real world. Now, not everything in the internal world of the text has a counterpart in the real world. For example, nothing in the story may actually have happened. Okay, it might refer to things in the external world, but the actions themselves only exist within the internal frame of the text itself. So how to negotiate the relationship between the internal and external worlds of the text is a delicate thing, and it's something that scholars in my field spend a lot of time trying to do. Then the third framework that is activated when one reads a text is the reader of the text, the framework, the world of reference that the reader brings with him or her, and the community of readers that one is a member of. So there's always, a text is a linguistic structure, a discourse, an act of communication. It uses language. And language only really works when there's, you know, two people involved in a conversation or more. It's a text, I mean, I guess you could say a text is a soliloquy, but if there's no one to read it, then there's no one hearing it. It's sort of like if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there, does it really fall down, or who cares? I'm not sure that's the philosophical description of the tree in the forest, the idealism, you know, if there's no one to see it, does it really fall or not? But something like that is involved in language because it's an act of communication which has built into it that there's, you know, someone speaking and someone listening. So the reader and the reading community is also implied in the text itself, just simply because it is an act of language, discourse, communication, and stuff. So the way the readers and reading community access the internal world of the text and its relationship with the external world is part of the whole deal. These things are not separable, is what I want to argue. Now, the other, and these are sort of commonplaces, and I'm drawing here on a literary theorist, Benjamin Harshav from the Tel Aviv School of Poetics, and so none of this is fresh with me, but I'm kind of developing some of his kind of quasi-structuralist ways of linking these things together. What I also want to add, as someone who studies an ancient text, is that each of these dimensions has each of these frameworks of reference have their own history. That is to say, they each change over time. And so this is not a static relationship. It's a relationship where all three parts, all three, what would one say, legs of the stool change over time. And the changes affect the way that each of the other frameworks are implicated or activated. The text itself, for the book of Genesis, we know that the text itself has a very complicated history. It has a complicated prehistory in that, and I'm glad you're all sitting down while I'm saying this, more than one writer wrote the book of Genesis. Is that okay? Can I say that in Oklahoma? I used to teach in Texas, and I would sometimes get in trouble saying things like that, but I said them anyway. So we can tell even by things like the linguistic grammatical patterns of the different texts, that they were written by different writers in different periods. They represent different stages of biblical Hebrew even. Okay, so you can tell that one text was written in the classical period, one was written in a post-classical period, things like that. And just the language itself, the grammar, you can tell that from. And these are things that are familiar to some of you as the J author, the P author, the E author, and then there's one or more editors that puts these different prior texts together and sometimes adds editorial bridging or transitional verses here and there. So there's actually several hands, several texts, so that the text itself has its own internal history. The text also has a history subsequent to it being edited together in something that's recognizably the book of Genesis. And that is, the book of Genesis also changes over time because scribes copying it also make changes. Sometimes those changes are accidental, inadvertent changes. You'll confuse one letter with another. Instead of a resh, you'll write a daled, which those two letters in Hebrew look almost the same. Instead of a vav, you'll write a yud, which also look pretty much the same. So some of these are like graphic errors, visual errors. Sometimes they're oral, mistaken writings of text. But there's also a large category of deliberate revisions that scribes inserted into the text, sometimes to clarify obscurities, actually usually to clarify obscurities. And some of them are just a word or two words. Some of them are longer. Sometimes it'll be a systematic revision, like the ages. One of the things that I like, the ages of the ancestors who lived before the flood, turns out in the original version of that, or the earliest version that we can recover, 3 of the guys outlived the flood. And that's a problem, which the original author apparently didn't notice, and the original editor didn't notice either. But later, at least 3 different groups of scribes noticed it and fixed it in different ways so that they all die either before the flood or in the year of the flood. Isn't that clever? It's like a mobster show. You have to kill off some of these people. You get Luca Brasi to kill Methuselah in the year of the flood so that he doesn't outlive the flood by 14 years. But these are, so there's sometimes very deliberate, rational, systematic corrections from their point of view of the text. So we have a textual history of Genesis, which has all sorts of very interesting developments too. So there's a diachronic dimension of historical change in the internal world of the text. The internal world changes from its kernels of different prior texts to its later textual elaborations. Clearly, the external world also changes, has a historical dimension. As I just said, the internal world, the J writer and the P writer lived maybe at least 200 years apart. And so there's different phases of the external world that are being referred to in the internal text. Okay, so the external world isn't just one particular time, it's a bunch of different times. And then the later scribal changes can go for hundreds of years after that. Certainly, the readers in the reading community has a historical dimension. People are still reading the Bible, and we're a different reading community than the community that was reading Genesis when it first came out, probably somewhere in the 5th century BC, when it was finally compiled as a single book. So the reading community changes, and the reading community's assumptions about the book and what it consists of and how to read it also has changed radically over the last 2,500 years. Okay, so the idea that the reader relates to the text in a certain way and understands its reference to the external world in certain ways, but those perspectives of the readers have changed, wildly and dramatically, and is always implicated, activated in one's reading of the text. Okay, this is all the kind of theoretical framework of how to read the book of Genesis that I want to give you. I'm sorry this has been a little too abstract, but I think these are things that are really going on that we are sort of subliminally aware of. And it takes a little bit of effort to kind of excavate what these things really are, these kind of submerged categories of frames of reference and how they change over time and how they constitute what it means to read the book of Genesis. So I want to give you the Tower of Babel as an example of some of these dynamics. Okay, here's the Tower of Babel. Now, this isn't really the Tower of Babel, but this is a famous painting of the Tower of Babel by Peter Bruegel the Elder, who's a Dutch guy, lived in the 1500s. Actually, just looked it up in Wikipedia, so I got the century right. It turns out I didn't know this. You learn a lot by reading Wikipedia. He modeled some of this after the construction of the Colosseum in Rome, which I didn't realize before, but you can sort of see the little things that are in each of the, it looks like lions are about to come out of them and eat gladiators. And there's a kind of, he's got all these wonderful tricks here. It's kind of spiraling up, which is very interesting. None of this is in the book of Genesis. None of the physical features of the Tower of Babel are in the book of Genesis. So he's imagining a lot of this, okay? And his external world is very much in play as he's actualizing Genesis here. Not only that he knows the Colosseum in Rome, and he also, according to Wikipedia, regarded the Colosseum as also a kind of exercise in hubris of the Roman Empire. And by his time, the Roman Empire had fallen, and so the Colosseum is in ruins. And if you go to Rome, it's still in ruins. They still can't manage to fix it very well. It's this huge thing. So he's kind of saying the Roman Empire and the Colosseum are modern exemplars of this overweening hubris of humanity, overweening ambition. And then there's these people down here on the left. Wikipedia says this is Nimrod, who's mentioned a few chapters earlier, one chapter earlier in Genesis, as having been the first king of Babylon. And so in the exegetical tradition, King Nimrod is often described, is always often linked to the Tower of Babel story as the person who was in charge of its construction. Now, again, that's not in Genesis either, but it's a kind of interpretive inference that various communities of readers have embraced. But notice that Nimrod, this image of this ancient king of Babylon, is wearing 16th century Dutch fine clothing. So there's another way, and his princes are too. So there's clearly a way here where the external world referred to in this representation is the external world of Bruegel, of the reader, which is 16th century Holland. So it's a wonderful, this is in Vienna if you ever go there. It's really big, it's just gorgeous, and there's so much detail. But they're building the tower, but you can see all the blocks over on the right-hand side. And there's all sorts of busy stuff going on. And you can see the inside of it above. It's very intricate. So this is a culturally authoritative rendering of the Tower of Babel, but it has all sorts of things from the external world of the community of readers in Holland in the 16th century. So the Roman Colosseum, all of these things. So it exemplifies how these different aspects of how actualizing the internal world of the text involves things in the external world, both of the text and of the reading community. But it's also just a really pretty picture of the Tower of Babel. Okay, now let me turn to the text itself, the internal frames of reference of the text. Now, the Tower of Babel story is very brief. it's only, let me make sure I say this right. It's only 9 verses long. Okay, it's in the book of Genesis. It's a really, really short story. We wouldn't even call it a short story. It's a paragraph, which doesn't really count as a short story, but it is a story. It's a complete story. It's just told in this very, very terse way. And yet, within its economical means, it does a lot. And so I want to stress here how the communicative structure of the text itself has a very intricate interior field of reference. So this is the whole text. Can you see that? I want to apologize, particularly to my 2 sons who are red-green colorblind. They won't be able to read half of this. I decided to put some of the internal echoes and repetitions in different colors in this slide because I could, because you can use color in real life. But I ran out of colors. There probably are more colors, more gradations of colors, but there's so many echoes and repetitions and subtle variations in this text, in this short little text, that these colors are only like a partial representation of this internal, almost crystalline structure of the text. It's not a perfectly symmetrical structure. There's all sorts of variation and play within it, but there's just an incredible density. So the story is about, it's one chapter in the beginning part of Genesis, which describes how the world and humans came into being. Okay, this is a definition of myth by a colleague of mine, a late lamented colleague of mine at Berkeley, Alan Dundas, who is a professor of folklore. And this is what it does. It describes and explains how the world and humans came to be in their present form. This is one of the main functions of mythology across the world. So this is, what is it explaining? Well, it's why in the world that we live in, there are many different people who live in different places and they speak different languages. So we can't communicate with them, or at least it's really hard to communicate with them. Now, hopefully, I was just told by Alan this morning that at OU, every undergraduate is required to take a language. Is this still true? Okay, there you go. So you're going to work on this. You're going to be able to communicate with people in different places who speak different languages. But this is a strange thing about the world. Why is it that we can't communicate with each other? We can communicate within our own language community, but we can't communicate with other people outside. Why is that? And why do people live all over the place? People live in Oklahoma, they live in Texas, they even live in California. Everywhere there's people. Where did they get there? Why is this strange phenomenon of the incomprehensibility of other peoples a thing? So this is a story that explains that. So in one of its main themes is explaining the diversity of languages. But within that, the story itself is also about language, I think in a more diffuse and interesting way. That is to say, it's a particularly virtuosic use of language to create this story in such a way that language is itself kind of thematized and problematized in the story itself, such that when there's the resolution that there's a lot of different languages, I'm not really sure, it's almost like an explosion. There's so many dense linguistic things going on and just kind of boom, now there's a lot of different languages. So let me show you how this text is talking about how these things came into being, how the diversity of human communities and human languages came into being, but also a kind of deep meditation on the nature of language and some of the strange properties of language. So there's more going on than we would initially imagine. But we can see what's going on just by attending to the intricate internal frame of reference of the story. So let's look at some of these repetitions and variations. All the earth had one language and one set of words. That's the initial situation. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way things were in the beginning, as one can imagine. However, it turns out that that's a problem because Yahweh, which is the way they pronounce, the ancient Israelites pronounce the name of their God, in modern Jewish tradition, that's taboo. But I'm taking a get out of jail card here by saying I'm a scholar of ancient Israel. And so we're looking at how the ancient Israelites would have pronounced it. So Yahweh came down and he said, behold, they are one people with one language for all of them. Well, between the time we are told that they're one people with one language and the time that Yahweh sees them as one people with one language, that's become a problem. So the initial situation, which is perfectly benign, becomes something that's a problem that Yahweh has to solve in the course of the story. So this is the big complication. How does this one people with one language become problematic? As the next set of repetitions is when the people speak, each one said to his neighbor in the first part, come, let us mold bricks and bake them in fire. This is the first thing they say. So they're going to build some stuff. That's okay. There's a sense here, and I have to read this to you in the Hebrew to get this sense for you. They said to each other, Hava nilvana, Hava nilbana levenim v'nisrefa l'srefa. Notice the rhythm there. It's almost like a sing-song thing. Hava nilbana levenim nisrefa l'srefa. They're sort of saying the same words and the same sounds over again. This is like the perfect language where things mean what they mean and everything rhymes. Okay, let's brick bricks and let us fire fire. It's the closest thing that we could say in English to replicate this. And even the hava nilvana, there's an internal rhyme. This is like the perfect language, at least in the first few things that they say. So words, in a sense, words correspond to things and correspond to actions, and it's all rhyme. It's like a perfect, romantic concept of what language should be. The sounds and the sense go together, and you can say things very simply. And they're all saying this together. They're all sort of saying this in unison, each to each other. So this is the initial linguistic community. And everything seems pretty nice. Everything seems pretty perfect. They're all in one place. Each one says the same thing, and it's this wonderful little melodious speech. And then they repeat some of what they said before. Come, let us, they're saying this imprecation to themselves a second time. Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower with its top in heaven, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be spread out over all the earth. All of a sudden, there's a little trouble in paradise because they're building this because they're nervous, they're anxious. They feel like if we don't build this city and a tower with its top in heaven, they'll be scattered all over the world and they won't have a name. A name kind of means fame. Okay, it's a form of immortality. They don't want to be ephemeral. They don't want to just be people scattered all over the world. They want to have a real claim to fame, a claim to honor and reverence and authority. But within that desire is an anxiety. Let's do this lest we be scattered all over the world. So think there's trouble in paradise, okay? And this is a kind of thing that people do. They want to do things, build things to make a name for themselves. Now, this doesn't really happen on college campuses, does it? Or you build a new building and put someone's name on it to give them honor and authority, and no, it wouldn't happen here. But it does on my campus all the time. So there's this desire to build things and to put your name on things. I was just telling Alan today, my evil neighboring campus in Silicon Valley, it's called Stanford. They have a Google building. They have an Apple building. And they have all these other buildings of these big tech companies. And it's just big accomplishments with big names. And it's kind of creepy. I mean, we have the same thing, but we don't have Apple and Google. So this is the whole first part of the story where the people speak. Okay, and they're talking to each other, and God's not involved. This is just the people by themselves, and they start this loop of building a city. And what's the only thing? And it's not clear that that's a bad thing to do, except for the one phrase that says a tower with its top in heaven. Now, in the first chapters of Genesis, there's a sense that this is a warning. This is not something you're supposed to do. Already in the Garden of Eden story, the people had eaten the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which made them like gods with respect to knowledge. It's not entirely clear what it means, but it does, whatever it does, it makes them like gods. And so Yahweh kicks them out of the garden, lest they eat of the other fruit of the other special tree in the garden, which is the fruit of the tree of life. And he says, if they eat the fruit of this other tree, they will live forever and essentially become gods entirely. So they're kicked out of the garden because they became too much like God. And they're kicked out so that they don't become entirely God. So there's this relationship between being human, what are the limits of being human, and the boundary between being human and being God. So this phrase here of making a tower with its top in heaven, well, that's God's domain. Okay, so there's a kind of trespass going on that in a sense echoes the trespass that's partially accomplished in the Garden of Eden story. So this activates this theme. Now, of course, the way the story turns out, in the second part of the story, Yahweh comes down and sees what they're doing and decides to do something about it. Because he says, behold, there are one people with one language, blah, blah, blah. Now I'm going to let us go down and confuse their language, and so no one can understand each other, so they won't be a problem anymore. And we'll scatter them across the face of the earth. Notice that there's a balance between the first part of the story and the second part of the story. The first part is just people talking with each other. The second part is essentially God talking to himself. It's possible that there are other angels around that he's talking to as well. And it's a top-down thing. He says, come, let us go down and see what they're doing. So the people are building something. In the first 4 verses, the people are going from the bottom, from the earth up. And then in the next 4 verses, God it's top down. God says, look at what they're doing, let us go down and confuse their language. So there's a kind of correspondence in part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is the human part 2 is the divine part, which is going to resolve the problem of the humans. In each of these cases, what in the second part, there's things that are referring to, echoing, repeating things in the first part. And in each case, there's a kind of irony that the people's initial intentions go really bad. Not only does the earth has one language, and one people with one language become a bad thing. The idea that they're going to build themselves a city and a tower is now the example of what, behold, now that they are one people with one language for all of them, this is what they begin to do. Now there will be no restraining them from whatever they plan to do. So this is people trying to overreach themselves, trying to do something that they shouldn't be doing, that in a sense encroaches upon the divine world. So Yahweh has to toss them back and keep them back from that dangerous boundary between humans and gods, between the tower and heaven. So so come let us, so God says, come let us go down and confuse their language. So the language that was a unity now is going to become a multiplicity. And that's going to solve the problem of the unity of language and the people's aggressive plans that they concoct with this one people and one language. So let us confuse the language so no one will understand his neighbor's language. Before, each person spoke to his neighbor in the same language. And now he says, confuse the languages so that no one can, will understand his neighbor's language. So the what was easy comprehension in the first part, it becomes a promise of total incomprehension in the second part, and that's going to solve the problem. So this is why we have different languages that we don't understand, to prevent people from doing these massive, ambitious, overly ambitious, in this case, cultural projects, like building a big city with a tower that goes all the way to heaven. So Yahweh spread them out from there, which is precisely what they were anxious about. He said, let us build this tower and the city with its top in heaven, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be spread out over all the earth. Well, because they do this, they are spread out over all the earth, because doing this is what they shouldn't be doing instead of what they should be doing. So there's a real irony here in their attempt to gain a kind of cultural immortality, triggers their exile from this unified culture and unified language and unified humanity. So the very thing that they're anxious about is what their actions bring about, being spread out all over across the world. Moreover, they don't make a name for themselves. They don't get a name out of this. The name that comes out of it is in part 3, the last concluding verse of the text. It says, therefore they call its name Babel. So this is the only name that is made. It's not the name that the people want to make for themselves. It's the name of the city of Babel, which is the city of Babylon. For there, Yahweh confused all the earth's language. And this is a word play between the word Babel or Babylon, which in Hebrew is Bavel, and the verb to confuse, which is balal. So Bavel and balal, you can see they're sort of sound plays on each other. So Babel is so called because that is the place where confusion, where balal happened, where Yahweh balaled, confused the language of all humanity and scattered them across the face of the earth. Yeah, so be careful what you wish for, okay? You want to make a big city, a big tower up to heaven to make a name for yourselves, lest you be scattered across the face of the earth. Well, that's precisely what Yahweh sees as this intolerable ambition of humans of doing more than they should be doing, more than is appropriate for the category of human beings. And so as a, to solve that problem, he brings about precisely what they feared. Now they can't understand, each person can't understand their neighbor's language. They're scattered all over the place of the earth. They haven't made a name for themselves, but they've made the name of Babel, which is the city of confusion. And the city and the tower are ruined. And the ruins are the, in a sense, the monument, not to their fame or their greatness, but to their shame and humiliation and failure. So it's a really cool story, but it's only 9 verses long, and the use of language in it and the thematization of language in it is just really astonishing. And let me just, you'll have to take my word for it, it's better in Hebrew, okay? The English is just a kind of half translation of it, which goes to the theme of the fact that there are many languages that are mutually incomprehensible. And even the act of translation is sort of impossible. You can't get all of these nuances in a translation of the Tower of Babel story, which is precisely about the problem of different languages, the mutual lack of comprehension. Now, that's the internal world of the story. Okay, I want to move quickly to the external world. This is a picture of the actual ziggurat, the actual Tower of Babel in antiquity. And this is actually something that was found just about 15 years ago. It was in a Norwegian, it was bought by a Norwegian collector, a wealthy Norwegian guy who collects a lot of things, some of them fakes, but this was real. He spends a lot of money and doesn't really distinguish between the real stuff and the fake stuff. But this is real. This is a relief from the time of Nebuchadnezzar, the famous king of Babylon in the Bible, who defeated Jerusalem and exiled the people of Judah. And this is a portrait of him on the right. And this text and this drawing commemorate his restoration of this ziggurat, which is a temple tower in Babylon. So this is the Tower of Babel. This is a contemporary, more or less contemporary drawing of the Tower of Babel itself. It has 7 stages. At the top is a floor plan. This is, to me, this is really a wonderful discovery. I just like it. And it says here, I am Nebuchadnezzar, and I restored the facing and the foundations of this tower of this ziggurat in Babylon. And its name is called Temen Anki. Now, I tell you this Akkadian name, it actually goes back to Sumerian, because the name itself is quite revealing. It means the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. So the ideology of these ziggurats, these are temple places. On the 7th floor is a shrine to Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, at the very top. And it is literally, it's a temple that is the foundation, the linking place that links heaven and earth. That is to say, it's a tower with its top in heaven. Okay? And this is a magnificent structure such that Nebuchadnezzar wanted to restore it. It was 1,000 years old at that point already, over 1,000 years old. Well, maybe roughly 1,000 years old already. And it's made out of mud brick. And so every once in a while you have to restore it because mud brick doesn't last all that long. Even when it's baked in fire, it disintegrates. So he restored the facade and the foundation. And this is a great thing. This is a exemplar of the greatness of Babylonian civilization. Okay? So this is precisely the external world ideology that is being drawn upon in the internal text of the Tower of Babel story, but it's making fun of it. It's subverting it. What is great for Nebuchadnezzar II and for all the other Babylonian kings is anathema it's the anathema in the Tower of Babel story. It's the primeval, one of the primeval transgressions that makes the world a less good place today. So the biblical story, when you look at the internal frame of reference of the story and relate it to its external world, you can see that there's a very strong political critique going on. Babylonian civilization was one of the great old civilizations in the world. At the time, certainly of Nebuchadnezzar and his predecessors, Babylonian kings exercised authority over ancient Israel. Ancient Israel was like a vassal state of the Babylonian Empire. So in modern academic discourse, one could call this a kind of colonial or post-colonial critique of empire. Okay? And it really is. It's a critique of the Babylonian civilization and saying what you think is this great ideology of your ziggurats and your kings and all that is the worst possible thing. In antiquity, Yahweh destroyed it and made the world worse as a result. Now, at the same time, there's a kind of duality that with respect to the external world. That is to say, it's criticizing Babylonian ideology and its pretensions, its claim to greatness and primacy. But it's also saying that initially everyone was in Babylon, our ancestors too, the ancestors of ancient Israel. And so it's both a critique of imperial critique of present politics, but it's also something that says that this is the condition of all of humanity. And our ancestors too were the ones that were complicit in this exercise in overachievement, in trying to be bigger than we were, such that God rebuffed us and put us in our place. So there's a couple of different layers here. Within the political critique, there's also a self-critique of human nature, of human frailty, and of human weakness, and that humans do try to strive too much to be more than they are, and oftentimes, at least in this case, it has monumentally tragic consequences. Now, let me, as a final little bit, what time is it? Yeah, as a final little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the frame of reference of the readers and the reading communities. So I want to talk about us. We're reading this, I'm reading this, and we're living in a different world than ancient Israel, okay?
So this story, in our world, in our frame of reference, the story doesn't actually explain how the world came. It's not historically true. We have other explanations that we have cognitive authority for us. But, and I want to do this but to my last point, the fact that we are so different from the ancient Israelites and the people of the Iron Age and so forth, also gives us an opportunity to kind of see things from their point of view and notice things that exist in our culture that maybe the story has some insight into or some perspectives on that we hadn't really thought about, or that maybe we're just now starting to think about. That maybe in some sense show that even in the Iron Age, maybe there was some perceptions about the nature of human frailty, human ambition, that are things that we're now at the point maybe we can take more seriously. For example, our world, Genesis is also all sorts of different kinds of also different effects. And I just wanted to give you something from a modern person, sort of a modern, sort of a person. There's subtlety in the story that I think with certain modern perspectives we can sort of see that are really there that maybe haven't been seen before. So Kafka has this nice thing, that the paradoxical quality of some of the things going on in the story. He said he was trying to write these kind of biblical parables. He said if it had been possible to build the Tower of Babel without ascending it, the work would have been permitted. Now that's a little weird because how could you build something without going in, without ascending? But I think he's right. It's not the building itself that's wrong. It's the fact that people want to ascend higher than what they should. Okay? So if they could have built it without going up it, it would have been fine. Because then it wouldn't have had this sense of hubris or trying to be more than you really are. So this is a kind of Kafkaesque theme that I think the Tower of Babel story is actually participating. Or at least we can see it there, and it's really there. It's talking about human hubris, not the act of not the construction as such. Which would be interesting. You could build a building but not go in it. That would be a weird way of living in the world. Okay, I just wanted to throw that in the way. But here's the picture I was going for. Here's the building of another really big tower. This is the biggest building in the world right now. The Burj Khalifa. And here's a picture of it when it was being built. Now it's in Dubai. It's in Dubai. Why did they build the biggest building in the world in Dubai? To make a name for themselves. Okay, well, and it worked. Because it is there, it's the biggest building in the world, and that's a towering human achievement. And we even call these things skyscrapers. Okay, this height scrapes the sky. That is an image of the ziggurat that joins heaven and earth. I'm not saying that it's wrong to build it. We're proud of this sort of stuff. But in our culture, we can build really amazing things. But maybe it's not so good that we want to do that sort of thing. I mean, maybe if you build something like this just to make a name for yourself, you can do a lot with it. The money it took to build this. But this is like human ego in a sense. And it's, trying to establish your privacy among your peers, the other taller building that they did. And let me say something else. I'm not really sure that this makes things worse, but no, I think this part does. The Bible is very suspicious of civilization, of human culture. And the Tower of Babel is one of the stories of that. That is to say, focusing too much on human achievement and human culture is dangerous. And it can cause you to have negative consequences. And God scatters them across the face of the earth and makes them incontinent to each other. Now we're doing all this stuff with culture. We're building big buildings. And I don't know, at least in California, we sort of think now that we're sort of destroying the world. That we're doing something with stuff that we shouldn't be doing. And destroying our own ecosystem. Okay? Without being fully cognizant. That we're building these towers of Babel without being aware of the consequences of just trying to overachieve. And maybe it's going to come back to bite us. Maybe it's not God that's going to cast us down. Maybe it's rising water level or the disappearance of water. In fact, in Babylon today, they don't have enough water because things are heating up. So we're sort of building culture but destroying the world. That's a little preachy. It might be illegal to say it there. But I think the perspective of the story itself contains that. a critique of too forceful human culture, human civilization for its own sake, without being aware of it. So I think there's a way in which the fact that we live in a different world, even if we can see that the plot line of the story isn't historically correct, there's things that we're doing in our historical plot line, the Bible story is critical of, that maybe we should be too. Or at least let me say that we can learn things from this ancient story that can change our perspective of our situation and human frailty that we still have, despite us being modern. Okay.